Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you guys are. Hey, listen, keep shouting out where you are. Who is at 3 a.m.? Where is that?
Is
That's
that Andrea?
kind of crazy. And Bradley from London, love it. I love London, spent a
Brussels?
lot of time there. Brussels, is that? No, it can't be 3 a.m. in Brussels, right? Bucharest, Andrea, okay, cool.
Chicago?
And Chris, you've got Arizona fires. Is that where you are, Chris? And
Italy?
a
God, I love Italy.
Chicagoan. And oh, we got a question. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, you
Yeah.
guys. So, Australia.
Australia.
It's tomorrow in Australia. It's already Saturday. Tell us what happened here today, okay? That's what I
It's
always.
already. It's always tomorrow in Australia.
It's amazing, but they should be able to look at things like what happened in the stock market and tell us ahead of time what to do, okay? Or any stupid mistakes people are going to make, you could warn us.
Exactly.
And
Brussels, Long Beach,
Marcelo,
Brazil,
yeah,
Gloucester, Gloucester,
Massachusetts, right on. Okay. Well, you guys are
Vienna. I
awesome.
I love Austria. I love Vienna. All right.
Shrimp on the Barbie, right? Okay.
Oh yeah.
You remember that
Dumb
line?
and Dumb and Dumber. Yeah.
I love Austria. Yeah, okay, well, we're going
Oh,
into a whole new
Guatemala.
thing.
Guatemala was my first real international trip as a photographer, 1995. Love it
Well,
there. I love Latin America, but Guatemala is
nice.
such a cool place.
You guys are coming in from all over the place, even Tampa.
Slovenia.
Wow, Guatemala. All right, well, listen, we'll keep talking to you guys from wherever you are. Send your questions. This is awesome. And let's get this party started. I'm Marc Silber. I'm an author and photographer here in Carmel, California, which is where Edward Weston and Ansel Adams both lived. So I figured if I moved here, I'd be a better photographer. Okay, does it work that way? I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, this episode, as you guys probably know, this episode is brought to us by our friends at Bay Photo Lab. Listen, these guys really are awesome. They'll make prints for you. You can see all the different frames. They'll put stuff together in the form of cards or books or whatever. And you know how much Dan and I and Bob and everybody basically who's ever been on this show talks about you got to get physical prints. Get it off your computer and onto the wall or into a book or into even a coffee cup is better than your digital stuff. So place an order with them. They'll give you a 25% discount for your first order. And you guys know our Uncle Dan Milnor, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. He is a documentary photographer. He's currently the creative evangelist for Blurb, and he's just a cool guy. Okay, so Dan,
Yeah.
awesome to have you with us again. Dan the man.
To tip our hats and pay a little respect to what that means.
Yeah.
And the day that we are doing this presentation on, it's a critically important day. It's something that cannot be overstated. So everybody needs to take a moment and sort of consider what it means and where we are today or where we aren't. The topic today is a bit odd, but I think it coincides perfectly with the date today and some of the things that are happening. This is a topic that from all over, but something I realized about myself going back to 2010 that I had never really considered until recently. And the first, and I have a whole series of notes here I want to go through. The first point I want to make is I realized that I became a better human being the minute I quit full-time photography. So in 2010, it was a Tuesday afternoon. I was not happy being a photographer anymore, and I just deleted my primary email account. I just said I'm done. And I deleted my email account. I told my wife I was going to change my career and do something else, and she said, whatever, you're always doing weird things, go ahead. And what it allowed me to do was take my foot off the accelerator and stop thinking about myself all the time. And photography, professional photography is a catch-22. You do have to spend a lot of time thinking about yourself and your work, especially now because we all wear so many different hats. We're the marketing team, we're the product team, we're the public relations team. We do everything. And sometimes you get so myopic and tunnel vision on yourself that you forget about the rest of the world and what it means to be human. So I realized very quickly that I had become a better person because I was starting to think more about other people and other things than I was about myself. But what prompted me to do this call was three conversations I've had in the last month with three different people who all used an expression that I find incredibly peculiar and something that I never heard prior to the internet. And that expression is, quote, "I hate everything."
Ouch.
And yeah, and Mark and I talked about this, and it's a very odd psychological experiment when you hear someone say that, because oftentimes they don't hate everything, but it's a fallback position of thinking that that is a logical path to take, that doesn't matter what you put in front of me, I'm going to find some reason not to like it. For example, and when the first photographer used that expression, and then the second one and the third one, all these faces began popping through my mind of people that I have met, that I know, and many of them are really good friends of mine, that have used that expression. And it's a very odd place to find yourself, because again, I don't think, and let me go all the way back here. So what it made me kind of laugh was I never heard that expression prior to the internet. And I think the internet, again, is another catch-22. It brings us so many incredible bits and pieces of information and data, but at the same time, we can sort of use it against ourselves and find division or find reasons to be skeptical or obtuse, or however you want to describe it. Now, when I came into photography, there were basically two camera brands. There was Nikon and Canon, and Nikon was the king of it all. Nikon had an 80 to 90% market share. And in the late 80s, this little pesky upstart called Canon came along with an autofocus camera called the EOS 1. And everyone said, oh, it's a fad. It'll never work. It's a fad. It's a fad. So the point is that all the photographers around me, for the most part, were either using Nikons or Canons, and people were pretty, they were behind whatever team they were using. You had Nikon people, you had Canon people, but they didn't hate each other. They didn't trash each other for using another brand. It was more of a curiosity thing of, oh, how come you're still using an AE1? One of the best photographers I knew shot an FM2 way into the digital era. He was still using FM2s, but no one said, oh, I don't like you. Oh, I hate that. Oh, you're an idiot for using that. They looked at his work and said, hey, I have no right to tell you anything because your work's better than any of the rest of us. The same thing could be said. This was another thing that sort of popped into my head. Again, prior to the internet, working in the darkroom with black and white film, and we had a choice of developers. We had D76.
D76.
I mean, how much history has been processed on D76?
I mean,
it's remarkable.
It's grainy, but it was the go-to.
Yeah, D76 was like the most forgiving developer in the world. You had Xtol, which used acetic acid as a developer, so it was like an updated, more environmentally friendly. You had Rodinal, which was my personal favorite, and you also had something called HC110. I used D76 because the school provided it for free, but I was infatuated by HC110 because if you filled the HC110 bottle cap with developer, it was the perfect amount to develop a 2-reel tank. It was the easiest, and it was liquid, and you didn't have to dilute, it was the easiest thing in the world. And people had allegiances to whatever their developer was. My friend Eric used Rodinal, and his prints were absolutely gorgeous. But I didn't hate Eric because he used a different developer. I didn't look down on him. I didn't try to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm going to do this or that. I just said, cool, man, your work looks amazing. And I think when the internet came along, what it did was it made a monumental shift in one way. And the monumental shift was photographers began, instead of obsessing about story and about the images, they began to obsess about themselves, because now we had a platform, the internet, to promote ourselves all day long, every day, and every movement we made was on display. And it changed the concept. And I think this is where the idea of, and hate is a strong word, let's just use dislike, the dislike of everything. I have friends who are incredibly talented, both in multiple disciplines, design and photography, both. But if you put anything in front of them, if you put a book that you produced, a book that someone else produced, a magazine, a flyer, a pamphlet, they will find a reason not to like it. And it's a peculiar thing. Now, I'm going to get to a point about this at the end that I think is the critical point. But I want to keep going through some of these other points first.
Yeah.
What happens is when you start to fall into that category, it creates what I have seen as a general malaise about your view of the world, right? So people that get into that, I don't like anything. I did this and I don't like it. You did pictures, I don't like those. There's a general malaise. You see them begin to pull back. They start to create less work. They start to create less good work. They start to spend more time sort of venting about imaginary things. And I think this is a very dangerous game. It's a very dangerous thing to come involved in. And the worse it gets, it coincides with the amount of time that you spend online. The more that people spend online, the more malaise that tends to set in. And I don't think this is a new phenomenon. I don't think this is related, only related to photography. I think this goes across the board. I love cycling. There are people out there that no matter what you were doing, hey, I'm giving away a free bike, they would complain about what kind of bike you were giving away. It's sort of a part of our internet culture. But here's the crazy part. If you get known as someone who displays this kind of attitude, word spreads very, very quickly. It spreads like a brush fire. Speaking of fires raging in Arizona, it spreads like a brush fire. And if you've never seen how fast a brush fire spreads, it is terrifying. And here's the rub. When I started in photography in the late 80s, there were a variety of very popular photographers who were high-level professionals who worked all the time that were notoriously difficult people. They were not nice. They were egotistical. They were insecure. They were mean to assistants. They yelled at the location scouts. They yelled at everyone around them. And I know because a friend of mine owned a hotel that was very popular with these photographers. And he had to throw out several of these photographers for life. And these are some of the biggest names in the world of photography. He threw them out and said, you can no longer come here because we don't like the way you treat the staff. And here's the thing. In 1988, if you were a superstar, you might be able to get away with it. But in 2020, if you're difficult, if you're not nice, if you're one of those people that are sort of fallen into that malaise of negativity, you will not last, because there's too many good people out there who don't fall into that category, who are easier to work with. I have a friend, a good friend, who works all the time. He's one of the busiest photographers I know. Is he the most visionary photographer? No, not by a long shot. But what he is, very nice, very intelligent, very well-rounded, amazing with clients, knowledgeable, funny, professional, etc. The guy works all the time. So I have a little test for people to do. And I know I'm rambling here, but there's two more parts to this, and then we can start talking and have questions. Unless, Mark, you want to add anything or
I will. I do, but I'm going to let you roll for a minute. I do have something I want to.
So this is a little three-part thing that you can do that I think will be healthy in the short term. If you think you're one of these people who tends to veer into this modern sense of like, I don't like anything, I will find a reason to not like it, you're going to do three things. The first thing you're going to do, and this might sound crazy, but it's not, is you are going to call a fellow creative. And this could be someone you know or someone you don't know. And you're going to call them and you are going to ask what they're working on. And you're going to ask how things are going. Not prying into their business details, but hey, as in general, how is your creative life? How are things going? And then you're going to ask them what they need. What is the single thing that they need that they don't have that might further improve their life as a creative? Now, you might get complete and total shock on the other end of the phone. You might get someone that hangs up on you. You might get someone who's suspicious, that gets angry. Believe me, I've done this. And then share something with them that's not about you. And what you're doing is you're basically making a new friend. You're making a new professional friend, but you're not doing it through your work. You're doing it through theirs. You're saying, look, it's a struggle for all of us right now. I'm just curious. I love your work. What are you working on? What's the one thing that would really help you get over the hump? What do you not have? Maybe there's a way that I can help you get that. And the reason I'm telling you to do this first is that in 2010, when I quit working as a photographer, I started working for Blurb. And I suddenly started to use my skill set, whatever skill set I had, in basically for other people and not for myself. And I tell you, it is one of the most rewarding things that's ever happened to me, because suddenly I have a skill set, right? I'm not saying it's a great skill set or a high level skill set, but it's a weird skill set. And I apply it to other people's work all the time. It's an incredibly rewarding thing to do something simple that might be easy for me, that then allows someone else in the creative world to make a breakthrough or have a success or make a connection. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Okay, so that was number one, was call a fellow creative. Number two is you're gonna write a letter by hand, and you're gonna write it to someone that is inspiring to you. And the reason you're going to do that is it is impossible to do anything else when you are writing a physical letter to someone else. You cannot be on your phone. You can't watch TV. You can't do anything else. I've tried.
So true.
So you're going to have a nice little gap in the noise of the day by writing a letter. And I have a sinking suspicion if you're able to pull this off once, twice, maybe 3 times, it will become routine in your life.
Yeah.
Because when you stop and focus on writing a letter, it doesn't take long. You think it's going to take long, but to fill a single page of piece of notebook paper with handwriting, it's not that much. It's probably 300 words, maybe at the most. It goes fast. But when you're done, you come out of it and you go, wow, I wasn't really thinking about anything else except this other person and what they meant to me. And the third thing you're going to do, I think you should do this once a week. I think other people think I'm crazy when I say that, but you have to take a day off thinking about yourself and your business one day a week. Just completely and utterly do not think about yourself and your business one day a week.
Yeah.
Because it's like hitting the reset button. Because here's a little interesting statistic, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. Happy people, content people, they need less money. They buy less material possessions, and they have less reliance on the government and less reliance on corporations. And that is the fact. So I think as creatives, we have a responsibility in society to be the better people, to be the smarter, to be the forward-thinking, the forward-leaning, the positive, the upbeat. Regardless of what we are faced with, we look at the scenario and we go, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out some way to address this. We don't fall into that negative slope, and we keep moving forward. So that was my soapbox for the day. But again, this was based on real world data over the last 3 months of listening to this, watching it sort of happen and saying, hey, we have an opportunity here to move in a new direction. And if you are one of those people that's sort of falling into that malaise, you have a little roadmap for how you can get out of it.
Dan, those are really good points. I got to chime in here because we were talking on the phone about this point, and one of the things, I'm not to toot our own horn here, but the thing that I believe that makes this show different is that it isn't about any one person. And it isn't focused on me. It's focused on you, like what you guys are going to get out of it. And, it's interesting because that point about calling up creatives, I do that all the time. And listen.
Oh, yeah.
People have asked me, how do you get all these great people on the show? Well, it's really simple. I go towards people who are generous and want to share their work and really believe that the best part of a person comes out when you're helping someone else, which is so true, right?
It's funny you said that because did you announce yesterday or the day before that you have Corey Richards coming on?
We had him on.
You had him?
He was on Wednesday, yeah.
So I saw that. I went to I went to a huge creative industry gathering in Denver prior to the pandemic. Rome Media put it on, which is a really
Which is
remarkable
part of
group out of,
his
yeah,
company, right? His group.
remarkable group out of Boulder. And during the presentations at night, he and his girlfriend or wife, I don't know what, sat in front of me. And I was like, oh, I think I don't know that much about him. I know some of his exploits in the adventure world, but I was like, oh, I think that's who that is. And I saw your name with him, and I thought, wow, that's, Marc got Corey Richards. That's pretty amazing. But it is about picking up the phone and saying, hey, this is interesting. My current scenario is my zine collaboration, AG23, and that is, 100% of that is taking the resources of two companies and two people and a team behind the scenes and technology and printing technology to try to help and further not only the contributors and their work, but a concept, an idea of like promoting understanding. And even though I had a piece in the first issue, a very small piece, it had nothing to do with me. I took the photos for my piece and I wrote the piece, but it had nothing to do with me. It wasn't about my photography. It was about a concept, something that happened back in 2012. And I can't stress how rewarding it feels to see someone else say, wow, you featured me. This is fantastic. So I'll give you a quick point. One of the people that was featured in the first issue is Frank Jackson out of LA, who is a very unique individual / photographer. And last week I get an email from Frank with a link to a film, and he says, hey, Milnor, check out this sneak peek. And a filmmaker named Greg Hatton, who's a LA, Hawaii-based guy, had done this film about Frank, just a short, like 4.5 minutes. And within 15 seconds of the film starting, I looked to see how long the film was because I knew it wasn't going to be long enough. It was so good in the first 15 to 20 seconds, I thought, oh, he's going to leave me wanting more. And so that to me was like, wow, if this somehow connects, if Frank Jackson or Greg or the combination of the two gets a new style of workout and the public gets exposed, that's pretty fantastic. That feels way better than like me getting published in some magazine somewhere.
Yeah. I'm going to chime in with one thing too, Dan.
Yeah.
So, when I started into photography was in the 60s, and the central soundtrack for me and for most of us during that time was the Beatles. And let's pull this picture up here. I don't know why it's not showing. Hang on a second. Oh, there we go. Wrong button. So their message, the central message of the Beatles was love. And this may sound really corny to people who weren't part of the 60s, like, Flower Children and all that, but they were the soundtrack. In fact, when I was in my little dark room that I turned my mom's laundry room into a dark room. It already had a sink in it. I had a little space for my enlarger, and I used to put a board on top of the washer and dryer where I put my developing chemicals. But guess what was coming through the music system was the Beatles. I mean, I could absolutely tell you, like, Hard Day's Night was the soundtrack for so many of my prints. It's like they're indelibly connected to each other. But the message of the Beatles was love. And, the message of any creative should be, and you'll find the best creatives are not only in love with their work, you have to be, because to carry you through all the hard stuff that you're going to have to do, whether it's writing a book or getting your prints into a magazine or publishing something or even just putting your own work together, you really got to be in love with it. Right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
otherwise
you have
you're
to
going to
know,
just bail out.
You have to know how much work you're about to put in. So speaking of the music, I drive a van now, and the van came with satellite radio. And I made this decision. I told my wife, I said, look, there's going to be three channels that we're going to listen to. That's it. We're going to listen to Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
We're going to listen to Fish, and we're going to listen to the reggae station, which is called The Joint. And I said, it's impossible to be in a hurry. It's impossible to have road rage. It's impossible to be in a bad mood. when you're listening to that music. And a Bob Marley song came on, War, which is a really interesting song. And when he came out with it in the time frame of what was happening in Kingston in Jamaica when it happened. But you're listening to that, and I feel the same way. It's like that's such a connection that combines with history and a mindset of positivity, peace. You know, I got to cover the Grateful Dead once for 3 days. I knew nothing about the Grateful Dead,
Wow.
zero. And they were doing an outdoor concert series in Phoenix. It was a 3-day thing, and the paper sent me over there. It was 190,000 degrees. The parking lot scene at the Grateful Dead of all the people together as a collective was so unlike anything I'd ever seen. And then the concert starts. It's an outdoor arena. There's 20,000 people or so. I turned around. I was photographing the band from the front row. I turn around, and 20,000 people are dancing in unison. Not a single fight.
Yeah.
I never saw anything negative. And I was used to going to like rock concerts where there was like security fighting with people and fist fights and people getting maced and like all kinds of stuff. And I show up at the Grateful Dead, and I got to spend time with the band. I mean, I had dinner with them. I have pictures of all the guys. And I was so blown away by this overwhelming sense of positivity. And to me, it wasn't the style of music that jumped out to me. It was the collective sort of overall feeling. And I totally think that somehow photography has to pull and channel whatever they can from these groups and these ideals, because this is a really hard time to be a photographer. And the next couple of years are going to be very difficult for most people. And the only way that we're going to get through it is if we pull this concept of like, hey, we're going to do this. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. We'll move forward. We'll help each other, reach out, etc. That was, you know, going back to the analog era. That was always one of the cool things about going to the lab. Was the fact that you ran into other photographers.
That's right.
And you'd sit in the lab, especially in LA. If you went to A&I in LA or Photo Impact or Paris Photo, it was like the who's who of photography. It might be their assistants too, but their assistants were incredibly talented people as well. And man, it was like this sense of collectiveness that
it was a community.
I don't really feel. Yeah.
Here's an interesting story from Annie Leibovitz. We both went to the same school, the San Francisco Art Institute. And she said, you know, one of the things that would drive you on in your photography, and this is so different than the modern world, is that your prints came out in a wash. So for somebody who's never been in a darkroom, the last step of your print, you got to wash out all the chemicals. So your prints, your final print is sitting in a wash, and everybody else's is in the wash too. That's your ultimate. She said that was the competition, because if you printed a really crappy, you know, why were you even bothering to do that? It's showing up in the wash along with everybody else. It's like hanging your laundry out. Everybody can see it. Right?
Oh, that is such a great point. That is exactly right. So in the dark rooms at UT Austin, you know, you had the group wash at the end. So you could only get a couple of prints in the developer, the stock, or the fix. But at the end, everybody, especially Fiverr, had to wash forever. Yeah. And if you had something good, if you knew you had something good, it felt really good to put it into the wash.
It was cool.
You knew someone else was going to go, hey, man, that's pretty good. But if you didn't have it, it felt equally bad in the other direction of like, God, but it did. It fueled you to go back.
It was a community thing. And just getting back to your point about the Grateful Dead, there's a couple of interesting points here that are very relevant. So what the Dead did is that they actually formed a community. Believe it or not, there's been marketing studies about the Grateful Dead. And one of the ways they foster their community is that instead of discouraging, what do you call them? The sort of illegal recordings. There's a name for that.
Oh yeah,
bootlegs. Yeah. Okay, so instead of discouraging bootleg recordings, they actually made a special spot for them where anybody could go there and record the Dead and spread it around. And consequently, it didn't lead to fewer sales of their albums or fewer sales of their tickets. It actually grew their sales. In fact, it helped build their whole community, which is why, again, people who are generous and share their work, you know, develop a following. It's just going to happen. It's a natural course of events.
And you know, the funny thing about the satellite radio Dead channel is that, you know, I grew up listening to bands, and I still love these bands, but their songs were, you know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. You know, every now and then
Oh
you get the
yeah.
crazy Freebird, you know, 17-minute Freebird. The Grateful Dead songs went on forever,
Oh, forever. There was their
forever.
hallmark.
Yeah, and the satellite channel. I might leave my house in Santa Fe, drive to the store, go shopping, get back in the car, and drive home. And the same Grateful Dead song, it's like it
Exactly.
just melds into something else. Yeah, it was. And I want to just point out really quickly that Rachel, when I was mentioning the labs in LA, she wrote in Narduli as well. And Philip Narduli was a lab owner in LA, and he's also a really good photographer. And yes, Narduli was another one of the good labs. When I lived in Los Angeles in the late 90s, there were, I mean, wow, there were so many. You know, the photo impact was literally 50 feet away from A&I Hollywood. You had A&I Santa Monica. You had Icon, run by a guy named Ramesh, who was amazing, super smart dude. You had Perry Photo down on La Cienega Boulevard. That was right by my house. The guys at Perry Photo, the guy who printed for Perry Photo was like a genius in the darkroom. And this is just scratching the surface. Narduli was up in Hollywood. It was a bit of a drive for me, but yeah, it was pretty fantastic. Those were the days. I think
Those were the days.
vast majority photo impact is still there, still going strong.
Hey, let's pick up some questions. By the way, Dan,
Yeah.
I got to show you. I know you're a big fan of Polaroids. Are you still shooting Polaroids?
Oh man.
I
Well,
just
I don't shoot Polaroid. I use the Fujiroid,
Okay. Well, I just got a
and
new
I just
camera.
shot.
I've got to show everybody. Okay. Can you
I
guys
just
see it?
shot one yesterday of my wife.
Well, this is a brand new camera that it's kind of cool. And, you know, the print comes right out there.
That is hilarious. I think my friend Kent would want one of those.
Yeah.
We got to get one for him.
This was given to me by somebody just recently, and I've been meaning to show it off. So that goes in my collection over here. All
I
right,
would
Jared.
love to have that.
Well, I'll get you one. I'll find one. Hey,
Right,
Jared.
because I would give it to my friend Kent, who does the most amazing things with Polaroids and mixed media, and he would be all over that.
Okay, I'll get you one. All right, Jared, we got some questions here. You've been keeping track?
Yeah,
So,
I've been keeping track. We've
what's
got a lot
our
of good questions.
All right, let's hear a
Here's one
couple.
that I think is really timely. D. Mola, they asked, so there's been a blow up recently about ethics of photography when covering racially sensitive spaces such as BLM protests. What ethical obligations do you believe white photographers should consider here? It's a pretty timely topic, so I thought that might be a good one to start off with.
Yeah, I saw that coming through the questions. That's a complex question and a complex answer.
Yeah.
The first photo essay I ever did in college was kind of crazy now that I look back on it, but it was in East Austin, and it was in a African American Pentecostal church in the middle of the worst part of the city, which had a grand total of about 6 constituents, 6 followers. The owner of the church was an African American man who would drag this enormous cross through the streets of Austin in the middle of the night in the worst like gang sections of the town, handing out religious pamphlets, briefs for people to try to bring them into the church. And I went over there to photograph that. I never looked at it from a racial angle. I looked at it from a story angle. And over the years, I've worked all over the place on all different kinds of stories. As a photographer, and typically if you're a professional photographer and you're working, you're being assigned something. And so the reason it's hard for me to answer that is it's such a complex question and a complex answer because the scenarios are so different. And again, I haven't worked as a photographer in a long time, so things are different now a little bit than they were back then. But I looked at story first and trying to make the best photographs I can to tell the most powerful story, to have the most impact.
Yeah.
Whether I was photographing in the African American community, the Latino community, the Asian community, didn't matter. All the countries I traveled to around the world to do that. I think every photographer has a responsibility that starts with being, if you're, and again, there's so many different kinds of photography that's another wrinkle in this answer. So it's hard. I don't know if this is the right venue or time to get into the whole thing. But
Yeah.
I think, you have a responsibility to be truthful and do the best work you possibly can.
I think Ed Kashi is a good example of that. He really made that point when he came on the show, that you have an obligation to not just rush into the scene, grab a picture, and then leave. You have to become part of it, and that becomes more genuine as well. He made that point really clearly.
So
And
here's an interesting wrinkle. That first photo essay I did, which was inside it was not only inside the Pentecostal church, which was basically only had a couple of rows of pews. It was sort of this weird storage facility. It was in, they had problems with the roof leaking, and they didn't have a lot of money for the church. And one of the constituents was this guy who would just come there and sleep on the pews at night, and he would leave. And when I first started photographing him, I was nervous. And two, I felt bad because there was no communication between he and I felt like I was kind of stealing something from him. And even though he knew I was there was no acknowledgement. And then one day he was in there by himself, and I went up and I was starting to photograph, and he said, "Please don't photograph me." And I said, "Okay, no problem." So I keep going back, and I'm going back, and I'm going back. And one day he comes over and he sits down and he's like, "I want to tell you why I don't want you to photograph me." And he tells me his whole life story, and it was incredible. And from that, so by this time now, I'm sort of a fixture in this place. I'm not, like, to your point, I'm not a looky-loo. This was prior to internet,
Yeah.
prior to social media. There was nothing I could do with this work other than make prints in the darkroom. And so that in some ways made it easier. I think nowadays in those scenarios, everyone assumes that every single thing you do is going to immediately be online. And there's this assumption that you are somehow profiting from these images that you're putting online. Back in that time frame, there was no way for me to profit from this. This was something I was doing because I was curious about what was happening, how it was working, what would help them, etc. So again, yeah, it's a complex scenario.
indeed. Hey, Jared, what's another one? Hey, we have some. This is unusual for Dan, but we actually have some questions about metering, and we might as well.
Yeah.
Why not? So Eric is asking about metering and what mode do you use? Aperture, manual.
You'll probably laugh at this. When I use my Hasselblad and my Leica, which don't have meters in them, I don't use a meter, because when you shoot the same film long enough, you don't need a meter. You just know the film. And this goes back to my newspaper days at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix. They used Fujichrome 100 was the film that the paper gave to us to shoot assignments. And so I shot Fujichrome 100 every day for 18 months. And I could shoot it at 100, 200, 320, 400, and I could just look at the scene in front of me, and I knew what the exposure was. And that's in the Leicas and the Hasselblads, I'm typically shooting Tri-X. I rated at 320. I know a scene where I'm in the spot that I'm in right now. I know what I would shoot at. So I typically don't use that. And in the Fuji, I use the metering pattern that is the evaluative one. I don't know what they call it. I don't know what any of the metering patterns are called, but it's the one that averages the entire scene. And it works great. The only thing I will do is I am constantly using my exposure compensation dial. Yeah. Because if I'm shooting backlit, I know I'm going to have to open up. So I'll just click that a couple stops, shoot, put it back to 0, and keep going. That's the only thing I do. I don't know any of the names of the metering options.
Yeah. Hey, here's something for back in the day when maybe they still do this when you open up a package of film. There used to be a little, fold up paper. It would give you, remember that? It would give you the settings for different conditions. Yeah. Like, okay, if you're shooting in shade, shoot it a 60th second at f5.6. This is on a piece of paper, you guys. And you actually would, by doing that, you actually did train your eye to, like Dan is saying, you would get where you just instinctively knew, okay, open up, stop down, whatever, which is, there's a lot to be said for that.
We had a Sunny 16 rule that we had written out on a piece of paper, and it was like, okay, with 100 speed film, it's 250 f8.5. That's your exposure anywhere in the world. 100 speed film, 250th of a second, f8.5. If you're an open shade, open up 2 stops. If you're inside, it's a minimum of 3 stops. If you're
Pretty
under
simple.
fluorescent, and you just memorized it. You didn't need a meter, because I'd be like, okay, I'm inside. I need to open 4 stops in here to get a correct exposure. And this is with transparency film. With negative, there's
which
so
is
much
really
leniency.
picky. Well, you know, the
Oh,
famous
man.
story of Ansel Adams' moonrise over the
Hernandez.
Hernandez, New Mexico. He pulls off. He's had a bad day of shooting. He pulls over. He sees the light, which was unbelievable, was hitting that one cross. He gets his 8x10 camera out. He can't find his light meter. Okay, so he goes, okay, whatever. He just did the calculation in his head and expose it. Now, if you've seen my video of this, the negative is really underexposed.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect at all. But he was able to salvage it, not just in the development of the negative, but in the printing. He brought out the full tonality of it, which was unbelievable considering how that negative is very thin, which means it wasn't deeply exposed. But he pulled it off anyway. So you don't have to have a meter to make it happen.
And Chris Rainier showed me some work prints of his once, and not of Chris Rainier's, of Ansel's. And man, he was in the dark room. That guy was a machine. The work prints, I still couldn't. I mean, I had a whole entirely new respect for him after I saw those prints, because it taught me that he could see the final object in his mind while he was still in the field.
Totally. That's visualization, which he talks about over and over again. His darkroom techniques, by the way, you guys may not know this, but a team from Adobe came to his darkroom to find all the things that he was doing, and they built it into one of the first builds of Photoshop. How about that? Okay, how about some other questions, Jared?
I've got one here that I think will be really good. So it's Chris Rothgeb. I think that's how you say the last name. Sorry if I mispronounced it. But he said, let's discuss the difference of community and how social media doesn't foster community or does foster community. I thought that would be really interesting since we were just talking about that a bit ago.
You know, it's interesting. Can I just say something?
Go ahead.
So, I mean, look at our own example of community. It's like right now we've got a community, which is you guys. And one of the things we were talking about after our show yesterday with Bob is how the interactivity, not just asking questions, but you guys talking to each other, is really what makes a community. It's not just a one-way or two-way flow. It's like you guys are interacting with each other. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I think social media can foster a community. It can. I think the way it's designed often derails that process. And I think it also depends on what you define by community, because social has driven us further into our tunnels of belief system. So if you believe one thing, you can go find a community online that will drive you further and further. I also think that a huge percentage of social media, especially in the photography space, let's just keep it to photography, I think it's phony. It's not designed to be truthful and create a community. It's designed for you to create the most palatable version of yourself that's appealing to the widest audience, because people are doing it not for the sake of good. They're doing it for personal gain. And so that's where it can kind of be derailed. I can only tell you from my personal experience. I was on Instagram twice in my life. I don't remember how many followers I had when I killed the account last time, which was a few months ago, I think. Even though I hadn't used it in a year, I killed it a couple months ago. I think I had a few thousand people that were following me, I'm guessing. That never, ever felt remotely like a sense of community at all, ever. What I'm doing right now with you, because I'm recognizing some of the names on this list from email, from my YouTube channel, whatever, this feels way more like a community. I would rather have 10 real friends than 10,000, 100,000, or 100 million online friends, regardless of how much monetary return that other community gave me. I'd rather have 10, because maybe it's a midlife crisis. I'm 51, and I know the difference between fact and fiction. I know the difference between what a true friend is. I'm not somebody who has a lot of friends. I'm someone who has a lot of acquaintances and a few friends. But I guess I should have said this up front. I am a very independent loner type person. I could go months and months and never talk to anyone else and be completely happy. So I was never, when I went on social and people would like my images, it made no change to my heart rate whatsoever. Whether I got 1 like or 1,000 likes, whatever, I probably never got 1,000 likes. Let's just pull it back to 100. Maybe I got 100 likes at some point. It just, to me, I could care less. I didn't look, I didn't care. There was no, I guess I missed out on the cortisol and the dopamine with the social. But to Chris's point, it's possible. And I'm sure it's happening all over the place. I've heard many thousands of times over the years that like, oh, social's doing this for me. And then you realize that that's not really happening. But I do think it's possible, and I'm sure it's happening in various places around the world. And yeah, I wish it was a little more honest and a little bit less about self-promotion, but who knows?
Would you say that in a lot of ways, when it comes to social media, people kind of get what they're looking for anyways, and then a lot of these spaces have kind of, they have the potential either way, but if people are going in looking for that self-promotion, then all they're going to find is that self-promotion, and if they're going in trying to find that community, they're much more likely to find that community. But most
Yeah,
people just aren't really that interested in it anyways.
and I think that's internet communities in general. I mean, it's rare. Like if I was, if I was hardcore one political party, and then those people tend to not join social groups that represent the other party. They only join the groups that represent what they already believe. And so, yes, if you can go in there, you find the self-promotion. One of the things that I think is the telltale sign of how bad the self-promotion and commercialism is when you see, take a superstar on Instagram that has millions of followers, and then you look at how many people they're following, and it's like 14.
Yeah.
And you look at that and you go, I have no interest in knowing that person at all, because if that's sort of the operation that they're running, because to them it's just a pork chop. It's a financial pork chop that they can hold in front of clients and say, look at how many people are following me. I don't care about them. I just care about the quantity. I don't know any of them because I'm not communicating with any of them. They're not really part of my community because we're not communicating or following each other. It's a one-way street.
Yeah.
And so that to me, when I started to see that happen, I was like, uh-oh, this was way back in the day prior to Instagram. This was when it happened with Facebook. I was like, oh, we've already derailed this. Like it's already heading in a thing. I'd rather just turn it off and not go on there. Now, I think one of the things that is positive about these communities, let's say, for example, your grandparents live in Copenhagen, and you have raised your kids in America, and you have a job that doesn't allow you to go back and forth. And, yes, you could FaceTime every day, whatever, but the people who are using it to keep in touch with family or do things like that, I think that that's a commendable way of using it. The fact that your data is getting tracked and sold and all that, that's a whole nother story. But it's, I think it's possible to do community things with it.
Yeah. Hey, Jared, let's do one more question, then we got to let Dan get back to work. Sounds
good. I think I got one good one that this will be a good one to end off of, and I think it works well for the times. Way back at the beginning of the show, Bradley, he was asking, do you still force yourself to go out shooting even if you're not in the mood? And I'm guessing there's a lot of people with the current state of the world that probably feel that not really wanting to go out or not wanting to take the time to take photos. So this, I think, would be a good question to end off on.
The thing is, I don't remember ever not being in the mood to photograph. Unless there were times when I had Lyme disease where I was really, really, really sick, and it probably never even crossed my mind to take photos, but I've never lacked the motivation to take them. But the short answer is I would not force myself to go out and make photos. I think that there's a million ways of being constructive and proactive and intelligent that don't require going out and shooting. If photography becomes a burden, and it has before in my career, there were probably twice in my career where I looked at photography and said, commercially, this is no fun anymore. I don't want to do this. And what was great about quitting photography was that it eliminated that ever happening again. Now, when I pick up a camera, I photograph things that I'm connected to, that I find interesting or important or just visually stimulating. And it keeps the practice of photography fun. And if I don't feel like photographing, I'll either sketch pictures. I'll sketch terrible pictures, by the way, because I can't sketch. I'll study Spanish. I'll try to play my guitar. I will read a book. There's a million other things to do that keep me happy outside of photography. Or I'll just go back and, re-edit some work, re-sequence work, make a publication. I'm getting ready to give a consultation here to someone here in town who's making her very first publication of all time. And she is wildly talented in 3 or 4 different, not photography and other calligraphy and all kinds of things, but doesn't have a computer and doesn't know the first thing about putting it into book form.
Wow.
So me helping her do that is really rewarding because 1, she has great work, and 2, I know how thrilled she's going to be when she finally gets this thing in the mail and sees and feels what it's like to see your work in publication. I think it'll be great.
There's a thrill to it, I got to say. And it's like, again, you hear us talking about it all the time, but you guys definitely publish your work. The cycle of photography, the final step of it is sharing your work into the world. And social media is one fast food way to do that. We've talked about that. It's quick. People are going to watch it for a matter of seconds. Whereas when you print something and you put it in a book form or put it on your wall, for goodness sakes, I mean, look, start with your own gallery in your own house. Then you're getting it out to the world, and it has meaning for you and it has meaning for other people. It's really important. It's so important. Physical prints are the core of photography, and we can't say that often enough.
And you don't need anything fancy. You can get small prints. You can get inexpensive prints. I love including prints in letters or taking a photograph, and I use a little app on the iPad that allows me to write a letter and pull images in. And I can either draw on the images or I can write over them. And I turn the letters into like little multimedia letters. And
you have to send me one of those, Dan. I've never gotten one of those letters.
You got to send me your emailing address.
Okay. You'll get it. Beautiful. Well, listen, you guys. And Dan, once again, always fun to have you on the show. I hope you guys, this resonated for you. This is, when we sort of started our whole new series, one of the things we did was this big survey, which a lot of you participated in. And one of the things that came up high on the list was the philosophical side of photography, which is what this show really served today. So thank you for letting us be philosophical with you guys. It's really important. And Dan, I know you got a lot of work ahead of you. Thanks for taking time out of your day to bring your stuff to AYP. Always great.
Yeah, thank you. And always good to get to chat with everybody. And to Marc's point, I think photography is a lot more than pushing the button. And there's a whole sort of ecosystem around it that ties into being human in a variety of different ways. And it's fun every now and then to just sort of stop talking about images for a bit and talk about the periphery. And it was good. So I'm glad that you're open to these kind of topics. But yeah, thanks again for everybody. And I will see you, I'm sure, in the near future.
We'll see you soon, Dan. Thanks again. Stay
Adios.
well. Watch out for
too.
that smoke.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, philosophy, art is included into philosophy. So it's a natural thing to talk about philosophy and art together because they go together. So listen, you guys, thank you. Thank you. And by the way, yes, I did get a haircut. You don't see the mullet in the back of my head anymore. It was like a dead rabbit that was just stuck to the back of my head. Fortunately, our barber has opened up. They wear a mask. I wear a mask. Kind of weird to get a haircut that way, but it did. But I've decided I'm just going to keep wearing this hat no matter what. This hat was designed by Carlos Santana, speaking of music. And last week I got a hold of the wholesaler. So pretty soon we're going to have these up on the website. You can buy your very own Carlos Santana / Marc Silber sombrero. Okay. You guys are awesome. And I wish we had time to answer everybody's question, we've got them here. Go to the AYP Club to keep the conversation going, because that's really why we started that. Because we wanted to not just end off every time we finished one of these, but keep it going. And this week has been just friggin' amazing. Corey Richards, 4 times up Mount Everest. National Geographic, a guy that's just done unbelievable stuff. And then Bob Holmes yesterday, another legend. And then Dan Milnor today. I mean, come on. Bam, bam, bam. So one thing I want to tell you guys is our channel is really growing. And I want to thank you if you're helping that growth. I bet you are. I want to thank you in advance. But I want to thank you in a way that you keep doing it. I want to encourage you to do more, because I believe that we have, and I'm not just saying this for myself, I'm saying this because you guys tell me this. I think we have the most important channel on YouTube, bar none, because here's the distinction. Every other channel you're going to go to is about somebody's own particular brand, whatever it is. That's fine. They should do that. But at AYP, my whole philosophy from the very beginning when I started AYP was to bring you people who have mastered their work so that you could learn from them and to give you access to them. That was my whole concept, and it's why I do what I do. It's not that I could be in front of you guys every day talking to you, and I'd love it. But why not bring you to people that you will probably never get a chance to meet? And I wouldn't have a chance to meet them if I hadn't invited them on the show. But I get to know these people, and they form meaningful relationships. Like Dan was a guest, and we've gotten to know each other. Bob Holmes, we've gotten to know each other. And so many of these great photographers are people who are now my friends, and I hope your friends as well. So I'm saying that because I need your help. I need you guys to spread the word. I think it's really important that we get our message out to the general community in photography. I think it's a very, very important message. Would you agree with me? And if you do, all you got to do is tell your friends. You've got a network of people that you are in contact with, whether you call them up on the phone, write them a handwritten letter, send them emails, put them on your social media. It really adds up. It's just something that we can all do that will make a big difference, because I believe we deserve to get really big, and you guys are a part of that. And getting bigger, by the way, will not mean less communication with you. It'll mean more. Okay? It's actually true. The bigger we scale, the better we can get. So that's one of the messages I want to give you guys. Join the AYP Club if you're not already in there. Jared will he's already put it there. The other thing is, stay in touch with our calendar of events. Now, we've set it up so that you can actually subscribe to that as an RSS feed, which means when anything goes up on that calendar, you'll be notified. I don't know how to do that, but apparently you can do that. So there is a feed address. Jared, I don't know if you can pop that in there. Rajiv actually put it in one of his messages. Rajiv is our overseas webmaster. Awesome guy. Thank you, Rajiv. He works in India, so we send him stuff in the morning. It's all done. Anyway, it's in there, so you guys can subscribe to it, which is really helpful. What else have we got to do? I have no idea what's coming up next week. Believe it or not, I went into this week with nothing really scheduled. And then Corey popped up, who I've been trying to schedule for a long time. And all of a sudden his people scheduled him for me. And then we had Bob and Dan, but I have a lot of people I've reached out to who I want to get on the show. I want to get, and I've mentioned this, I want to get some photographers from India. Any English-speaking countries, please send me your recommendations. I can't tell you for sure that we'll use them, but I appreciate them, and we'll basically, review everyone. So that's what we've got going on here. We've got more stuff coming up. I'm working on, I've been writing a book a year for the last 4 years. I haven't written a book so far this year, but what I am working on is releasing my courses as videos. You guys might have seen those, but we really ramped them up. We added a whole lot of new videos, and we're going to we did a soft launch. We're going to do a hard launch coming up pretty soon. I want you guys to take advantage of that. Just remember that. Same thing with Bob Holmes' course. We added a whole lot of new content. We did a soft launch. There's going to be a hard launch coming up. Okay. Well, I could keep talking to you guys all day. I love having you a part of our community. It's really great to see you. I love seeing your questions. Leave your comments when this video goes live, which is tomorrow. The way we do it is we leave it as an unlisted video, but Jared does a little tweaking and editing. It'll be live tomorrow. Leave your comments there. Subscribe if you haven't already done that. Tell your friends. If I haven't already said that, I'll say it again. And listen, last but not least, remember to get out and capture your own images of life. Love you guys. Stay well. Stay safe. Be creative. Talk to you soon.